Welcome to the Kansas 2025 Kansas Legislature show. I'm Becky Kaiser, and we are live here in Bunker Hill at the studio with several people that we are excited to have with us, including one new face that we're going to introduce to you. I am your moderator this evening, Becky Kaiser, and I am with Eagle Media in Hayes and also with the Docking Institute at Fort Hays State University, with the Institute of Public Affairs, where I am a fellow. We want you to be part of the program tonight too, to get your questions answered, or maybe you have a concern or a thought that you'd like to share with our legislators, and that number that you can call is 1-800-337-4788. First of all, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we're going to go back around the table and let them talk a little bit about themselves and committees that they're on, and especially we're anxious to meet our new person who is from the Ottawa Bennington area. First of all, closest to me, of course, is a familiar face, Senator Elaine Bowers, who is a Republican, District 36 from Concordia. Welcome, Elaine. Good to see you.
Always happy to be here.
And of course, Representative Troy Waymaster, very familiar face in this area, District number 109.
I drove a long way.
But yes, Bunker Hill. And you have a boo-boo that I didn't know about.
Yes, I do, yeah.
You want to tell us about it? Oh, gosh. The ice had something to do with it, I suppose.
I slipped on the ice and broke my ankle beginning of session. Yeah, so
terrible timing.
6 weeks in.
But you're healing.
I'm healing.
Good,
yes,
okay. And in from Western Kansas, joining us this evening is Senator Bill Clifford, who of course is from Garden City, District 39. Welcome, Bill. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And our new face this evening is Representative Don Wolf, who is from District 107, Bennington. And Don, I understand that you have some local government experience, and you bring that to the table as a new state legislator. Tell us about it.
I have been a commissioner for 6 years, and anyway, I enjoy it, but as being a commissioner, I could see some things that maybe the state mandated down that we didn't necessarily find easy to work with. And so when Elaine said that this position was opening up and that maybe I would like to consider taking this position, or at least trying to take it, running, it was a very quick decision, but we decided, yeah, maybe that was something that we could do and as a family. And so here I am. I guess walked all summer and got to know Beloit and Concordia very well, along with Salina and Bennington and Minneapolis, Ottawa County area that I'm familiar with, and worked hard. And here I am, and they put me on a local government committee, education one. I also have some background with working at a public school. And then my other one is taxation, and I really enjoy taxation because I'm kind of a numbers girl and I like to save money.
You're a number cruncher then.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, Bill, let's come back to you and talk a little bit and remind people about the committees that you're on.
Sure. As you know, I spent 3 years at the House representing District 122. I'm now representing District 39, 11 counties. I can say them all if you have time, but I do live south of Garden City in Finney County. I'm on the Public Health Committee. I'm the only physician in our chamber. We have one physician in the House. Local government, again, like Dawn, and that harkens back to my time as a county commissioner in Finney County. I'm on the Fed and State Committee. That's kind of a kitchen sink committee, the interface between, of course, state and federal issues, but also things like elections, convention of states, some veterans issues. And in the afternoon, I have my Utilities Committee. We also have a select committee on veterans, but it is yet to meet. So it's a busy day over in the Senate.
And Representative Waymaster, tell us about your committees. You're a busy guy.
Well, yeah, well, thank you, Becky. Representative Troy Waymaster, I represent the 109th Kansas House District, which is 5 counties now with redistricting in central Kansas. So that's Russell, Ellsworth, Lincoln, Osborne, and Smith counties that I represent. And I'm serving my 9th year as the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which is the budget committee for the House. Things have changed a little bit this year. We had a new budget process where actually the legislature drafts the budget. So we started that actually back in September of 2024 and developing a process on how we would have the legislature craft the budget as opposed to waiting for the governor's budget report to come out and then work off of whatever was submitted by the governor's office. So that's been a new process. We can talk about how that all transitioned, and right now, right before we had turnaround on Tuesday, we debated the House budget bill, and it passed on Wednesday, and now it's on to the Senate. So Elaine and and Bill will be looking at the House version of the budget bill. I also serve as the chairman right now during this year as the Build Kansas program, and so that is money that we put aside to draw down federal dollars under the bipartisan infrastructure law, so communities can apply for certain grants with the federal government. And actually, we're scheduled to have our meeting next week. We have a couple of applications that we're going to look at from applications where they can use the money that we put away as the federal match to bring down those federal dollars.
I'm going to jump in right now because it's on everybody's mind, no doubt. We're hearing a lot about DOGE at the federal level and cutting government, what is perceived as government waste anyway. And in fact, the state of Kansas has brought together their own committee or group like that. COGE. Okay.
Yeah. On the Senate side.
Are you worried about federal funding for different projects? Have you heard that there's going to be
We really
cutbacks?
haven't heard how things are going to transpire in the next few months. Obviously, there's some that are worried about Medicaid dollars and how that's going to be administered throughout the 50 states, and whether or not that's going to be in the format of a block grant or is it going to be in the same format that we have pretty much with the 60-40. Obviously, the discussion of Medicaid expansion has been coming in when we talk about Medicaid dollars. But one thing that we did do in the budget bill was when we first set up the Build Kansas program, the governor just wanted $200 million to be set aside to be used as the match for communities to be able to draw down the federal dollars. Well, the approval percentage that we get back from the federal government is very low. And so in the last 2 years, we've had $100 million appropriated for this program, and there was another $50 million that was going to be appropriated in fiscal year 2026. Being chairman of that committee and being chairman of the appropriations committee and knowing that we have $67 million remaining from the last 2 years of the Build Kansas program, we halted the $50 million payment or transfer to the Build Kansas program because there's no sense in having that $50 million state general fund sitting in that Build Kansas fund if it's not going to be utilized. And then also, we're also looking to see what happens with some of the items that did fall under the bipartisan infrastructure law, and if that'll be changing with some actions by the current presidential administration or Congress.
So a little bit of wait and see at this time.
Yeah, it is.
And Senator Bowers, we want to find out a little bit about you and the committees that you're on.
Well, yes. Well, now Senate District 36 has 14 counties. So Senator Rick Billinger, who you had on the last time, we each have 14 counties. So think about that. 28 counties of 105 are represented by two people. It's amazing on the Senate side. So we represent about 73,000 people each and very rural. So my committees are the same as last year, which I really enjoy. Transportation, as in real life, I'm a car dealer. I'm chairman of local government, which goes along with what Dawn has experienced, and I do ask her opinion on a lot of things. So it's local government, transparency, and ethics rolled together, serve on judiciary and utilities. And we do talk about wind and solar in our district, so I feel quite a good fit with that committee as well. Would you like to know a portrait of the Senate?
Of course, let's hear about it. That'd be interesting.
We do have, after our last election, so the dynamics have changed. We do have 31 Republicans now, 9 Democrats, 13 women, which is down a little from the last term, 27 men. And this is really interesting. I love trivia. There's 12 senators who represent cities over 100,000. Then we have 7 senators representing 20 to 100,000 city population. And this is where we fit in. 8 senators representing 5 to 20,000 cities and population. And then truly where we are, 6 senators represent 2,000 to 5,000 cities and population. So it's about an even split if you add up urban versus rural, which we do talk about that a lot. It's not so much Democrat, Republican as it is rural and urban and the differences between us.
And there are some.
There are, yes.
Well, let's talk about the budget. And Troy, you mentioned turnaround. Let's have a little civics lesson first and explain to us what that is, what that actually means, and what has happened.
Okay, so turnaround is pretty much the midpoint session of the legislative session. So what you try to do is you try to have all of your non-exempt committees with all the bills that they have and they want to pass out and then have those debated on the House or the Senate floors. debated by this time. And if they are not debated and passed out by the chamber, then pretty much they're not going to move forward. And so when we come back on Tuesday, everything will switch. So all of the bills that pass the Senate will come over to the House, and all the bills that pass the House will come over to the Senate. Now you have 3 exempt committees on each chamber, and that's taxation, federal and state affairs, and appropriations or ways and means on the Senate side. And so those committees can have bills coming out of their committees during the entire session. So what we've been doing with the change in the legislative budget process is just primarily working on the budget. I mean, for 6 weeks, that's what we were doing. We were having the budget committees reporting out to the appropriations committee every day. I mean, it was a gauntlet of actually trying to get 98 departments and agencies reported out in that particular time frame.
And that's unusual or different from how it has been done
Yeah.
before.
Oh, very
where it was
different.
Yeah.
Very
Kind of
different.
seemed like waiting towards the end.
We
and
tried to
scrambling.
modify that last year by having the governor give us some of the budgets beforehand. And we did, but it still wasn't, we were still coming into, what I'd say, a crunch time when it was coming towards the end of session. And so the speaker and I, we meet every day, or not every day, every week on Tuesday in the afternoon. And he and I have been talking about how we can change this process as far as the budget. Because that's the one thing that the legislature has to do, is to pass a balanced budget. And so finally, after last legislative session, he and I were discussing it, and he was like, you know what? I think the legislature needs to just drive the budget. And so we had a meeting with myself, my vice chair at the time, the chair of Senate Ways and Means, and the vice chair, the Senate president, and the Speaker of the House on what the paradigm would look like on how we would move forward with this. And so then I submitted basically my thoughts. And then in September of 2024, we started having preliminary meetings on how to move forward with the legislative budget. And you know, there were a lot of things that we found out that we were supposed to be involved in that we were not. And I'm not saying just by this administration, I'm saying by previous administrations. And I think it's because when you had the change of administrations, you lost that, like the Senate Ways and Means chair, the House Appropriations chair was supposed to be invited to the appeals process when the governor was putting their budget together, and the agencies and departments that still wanted items that was not included in the governor's budget would be able to appeal that. And we were supposed to be invited, and in the 9 years, I've never been invited to this.
Was that by mistake or
I think just by,
knowing?
you know, just not by not knowing. And so a lot of things were exposed on how we can move this budget process forward. And by attending the appeal process, Rick Billinger and I were able to see what may not be included in the governor's budget. So then in December, we started having what was a special committee on legislative budget. We had 5 meetings. We went through every department and agency's budget, so we went through 98 of them in 5 days on all the enhancements that they were asking for. And there were $1.1 billion in enhancements that was being asked for. And so we compiled all the information, we made motions during that time, and then we were able to, or I was able to introduce the legislative budget on the first day of session before I broke my ankle. And that was the first time that we've ever introduced a budget on the first day of session.
Wow.
And then the very next week, we were starting with the Budget Committee deliberations of them reporting back to appropriations and putting the budget back together. And I can say, of the $1.1 billion in enhancements that was being asked for by the agencies and departments, only about $193 million made it in. So we sized down the enhancements by north of $900 million of what agencies and departments were asking for. And we have a budget that passed the House on Wednesday that is below the governor's budget by about $167 million. And now, like I said in my opening comments, it'll now go to the Senate. and be deliberated by the Senate chamber.
Continuing to talk about the budget because of its importance, senators, as it comes to you, what are the next steps for the Senate then? What do you expect to have happen? Let's start with you, Elaine.
Well, very unusual for us that we always started with the governor's budget, and then the House and the Senate each had their version, and then they blended. So we are now looking forward to having our hearings on the Senate side with Senator Rick Billinger as the Ways and Means Chair, and see what we can add, change, decrease, whatever the Senate side is. So I'm curious to see. I don't serve on that budget committee, so I am curious to see how this process moves forward on our Senate side. And I bet Bill also that it's unusual for us not to have subcommittee meetings. So
It is.
now we're just curious to see what it looks like from our side.
Yeah, it's been kind of opaque to us thus far in the Senate. I mean, we trust our House
House
colleagues.
yes, and
I'm glad
especially-
you do.
And especially Troy, yes.
But I'm anxious as Elaine is, to get to see it. You know, one of the things we do get to do in the State House is constituent work and solve problems. And if I might segue a little bit, in our local government committee, we brought a bill, Senate Bill 2, which Senator now Blue from Great Bend and I were able to pre-file to try to verify a school bond election in Tribune, Kansas, USD 200, that had been overturned by the Attorney General due to a defect in the notice. And we our very efficient local government committee passed that through. We did amend the bill so this wouldn't happen in the future, and it crossed the Senate floor, and now it's on its way to the House. So it's one of the satisfying things about what we do. Usually it's not to the level of bringing it to the Senate floor. We take care of a lot of constituent work on our own time and on our own off-session time. But in this case, it was something that required legislative action, and so far so good. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that'll get across the House floor and signed by the governor.
And also I can say, as chair of local government, something that we learned is not every county has a web page.
That's just what I was going to
And
ask about.
that is
Sure.
what we learned, and how do we rectify that? And, you know, we had the Secretary of State disagreeing with the Attorney General, and this is the solution that we found with Senator Bill here, and what do we do moving forward?
We'll see
So
what happens with
fascinating,
that.
yes.
Yes, that'll be very interesting.
And it'll go to Dawn's committee, so she'll listen to this and see what the changes, if they're going to say, hey, the Senate got it right, or we can tweak it a little bit. So
Do you
we'll
have
see
a
what
feel for
happens.
that yet, Donna?
I do not believe so. But there are several people that have been commissioners on my local government, and it is nice to have us all together and just kind of discuss and go over how this will or won't work as we see bills that are coming through. And I can't say we always agree, but we do a lot of times of just having that knowledge of having actually worked with stuff that mandates down to the state. And there's a couple of us that are like, I don't know that we want to tie the hands of the counties when we're going to make them responsible for paying for it or doing things that isn't, you know, you got to look at it through that lens when we're legislating down here, because local government's the government that's closest to the people, and we want to make sure that we keep our constituents happy. And if they say, Dawn helped pass that and it's not working well for us, we don't want that to happen. So.
And as your experience as a county commissioner, I'm sure that brings a lot of knowledge base to those programs and ideas that come in, and they may sound great, but then I hear that often as a news reporter in Hayes that it's unfunded mandates all the way down, and that is a concern, of course, and everybody's budgets are tighter than ever.
Right, and once the state, we'll just talk about the state right now, I'm talking about myself now, pulls that lever to do something, it may have unintended consequences that we kind of want to go through and think, and we can't always think of all of it. We try, but we don't always think of everything, but we do want to make sure we're sending good laws down for them to be able to deal with, and not at the expense, extra expense of the taxpayers.
And it goes right into taxes with what the Senate has been doing with a constitutional amendment of a 3% cap versus what the House looks at. And Dawn can talk about that a little bit on the tax committee, of who's chaired by another county commissioner in another life, of what their plan looks like different than ours. So we have discovered there's 18 mandates that are passed down from the state to the counties that are unfunded. And is that an avenue to look at? Do we remove something that we demand that they do with no money. And we think about elections, collections of taxes on vehicles, how many others, mental health. So we have
Sheriff, jail, prosecuting.
everything we
there's
make
just
them
all-
do with their tax dollars that are unfunded mandates. So maybe that's another way to look at tax bills. So we're anxious to see what the House comes over for ideas with us on how we blend these together.
That'll be
Fascinating.
interesting. Do you get done a lot of, at this time, you've been in for a while and very busy, I'm sure, but do you get a lot of input from local governments, local representatives, and concerns about what the state is making them do?
Right now, yes, because there's a few of us women who have stuck together that we just had like a weekly thing where we got together as commissioners and we talked about the things we were going through and how we dealt with that. And they've been gracious enough to leave me in that little circle. So I still get to see some of the things they talk about and the things that they are. I'll say, hey, this bill's coming through. What do you think about it? And it's just nice to be able to bounce that off people. And one of my former commissioners, and we couldn't talk because there's only 3 of us, and so that breaks the rules. So anyway, I had sent to him and said, we're working on fixing our capers so that it'll be a little bit better for some of those newer people that are in level 3 instead of 1 or 2. And he goes, what are you working about? What are you working on county stuff? You're in the legislature now. I said, because everything we do affects you guys in some way or other. So we got to keep that in mind and just remember that as we move on.
And that capers bill is one of the bills we had on Wednesday.
Yes,
We
yes.
debated on Wednesday.
Speaking
For
of
capers
capers,
3.
Yes.
I have an email question here. This person who's emailed in wants to know, will the people present support bills introduced to give capers legacy retirees and others a COLA or some kind of increase? And they go on to say that legacy members do not have any control over their accounts. Concerns?
You know, I haven't really heard that much about a COLA. I mean, it's always circulating out there about a cost of living adjustment in regards to, capers, retirees. I think the last one was done in 1997. I mean, it's been a while since the last COLA adjustment has been made. Now, I know this was actually brought up the last time Elaine and I were on this show with Senator McGinn and Senator Dietrich. And Senator McGinn, had a very good explanation as to why we normally don't do a COLA for capers 1 and capers 2 is because they're more looked at as a pension system, where capers 3 is more looked at as pensions like 401k. So it has different mechanics to it than capers 1 and 2 do. And her explanation on the program back in May or April of last year was that, I mean, when you sign up into capers and it's being a pension program, you know what your benefit is going to be based off of the length of service and how much was contributed, and so you know what your benefit is going to be. And I will say right now, a cost of living adjustment is going to be extremely difficult with the budget that we currently have, because even with the tax policies that we've passed in the last couple of years, we eliminated the sales tax on groceries. We had a tax package that was passed in a special session in June of 2024, and we started the year spending $400 million more than what we're taking in. So we have to be very cognizant of what our spending is and moving forward. And that's one thing when we were crafting this budget, for the first time, we looked at reappropriations, which is the money that has been appropriated in the budget for an agency and department from fiscal year 24, not spent, and then it carried over into fiscal year 25. And we had $619 million in reappropriations last year, or this current fiscal year. And we actually went back and evaluated some of those reappropriations and was able to pull back about 80 million of it and say, okay, agencies, departments, you were overfunded. You were not utilizing this money. And so we're taking this money back.
I'd like to comment about capers a little bit, Becky. I was on financial institutions, pensions for 3 years. And one thing that differs between CAPERS and standard 401k is you are guaranteed your pension.
Yeah.
And with a 401k, if you're in the market and it goes down, you are not guaranteed it. We didn't do anything for a COLA, but again, we have the guaranteed defined benefit plan. But we did put a lot of money in. I think 2 years ago, Troy, we put 1.125 billion with a B
To the
into
unfunded
CAPERS
actuarial liability.
to take care of the unfunded actuarial liability. When the teacher's pension plan, which was broke many years ago, was brought into CAPERS, it was about a 56% funded liability, 44% unfunded. Now we're up to about 73%.
We were hoping to be north of 80.
We were
And
working
then they made
on
an
it, yeah.
adjustment on how much the rate of return was going to be, and that put us under 80%. The goal was to be 80%.
But we're in very good shape on the funding of the pension plan. Folks who are current retirees and current state employees should feel very confident about the state pension
Yeah, I
plan.
mean, and Senator Clifford's right. I mean, the system is solvent. I mean, it wasn't that very much long ago that we were right behind Illinois as far as insolvency in the fund. And we've made a lot of investments in the last couple of years just to make it more of a solvent program.
Exactly.
And he's exactly right. I mean, you have a guaranteed benefit as far as being in a defined benefit plan. And that's why the discussion of COLA has been kind of a difficult one.
I'm thinking about the budget, which is on everybody's mind, both at the state level and the national level. And Troy, you were talking about the Kansas version of DOGE and COGE. And as I understand it, this is open for residents of Kansas to suggest ideas of, here's how I think maybe we're overspending, or we could save money in this area. Is that working, would you say? Senator?
We had our first bills on the floor the other day out of this committee, actually. I think it's fascinating that we have a website that we can go to, and it's a fillable form. I went to it today. People can suggest their ideas. In fact, it was so popular it crashed early on. So we double checked. It was working today. And you can send an email to us, but I will read off the legislative page that people can go to. It's very simple to do, but it's our kansaslegislature.gov and then /i Kansas COGE, COGE. And it just takes you right to a fillable form. So it's very user-friendly for our constituents to say, we have ideas to save money. So we did have a couple bills that came across the floor. One was, it was quite controversial, SNAP payments on candy and pop. Can you use your SNAP funds for this? That was a bill that did come out that was debated on the floor. And so that's one idea that just came out of there.
Remind us what SNAP payments are.
It's the supplemental nutrient, it's the
Food stamps.
yeah, food
essentially.
stamps, yeah, basically. And so that was a bill that had an idea that came out of there of how to better use those funds. So that was just one idea. I think there's many other ideas that come out of there. There's mailings that go out to businesses that maybe aren't necessary, that's already on the web page, was one that was discussed. So we can see that. And then you also can email kansascoach@senate.ks.gov to email ideas in as well. So I'm curious how much it mirrors DOGE. So it's still a new committee.
It's very new.
It's very new. It's a great interactive tool that we have with constituents. So I'm not on that committee, and Bill, I kind of wish I was too, because
I'm not either, but I think, our Elon Musk is Senator Renee Erickson from Wichita, so folks could reach out to Senator Renee as well, Senator Erickson.
And the second new one is the Veterans Affairs that Bill mentioned earlier too, that hasn't met. So we do have two new committees. I might mention emails that we're getting and phone calls from constituent is on Drive Kansas, which is what we would know as K-tags. I can't tell you the last few days how many calls I've gotten, because we're getting,
Well, I received one of them.
so there's
I've
spam
received two of
text
those.
messages. And
Or text.
it's
Text messages.
a good time to alert people that those are a scam.
Saying that you owe money
That's
to the
exactly
Turnpike
right.
Authority. I got two of those in the last couple of
I have
days.
Just
Wow.
recently, we were just told, just this past week, there's just been a new attempt. And so that's a common constituent service question, but I thought I would mention that tonight. They are fraud, and you could reach out to us anytime, but Drive Kansas won't do that. They don't solicit payments like that on your text messages or emails. So just be aware of that. That's something that we've been alerted to as legislators, and they are annoying. Yeah, I report them to junk every time.
Yes, yes, that's a good idea. You think people who have the skill level to do that, if only they'd use their skills for good instead of
Yeah,
something like
bad.
this.
Well, I mean, the thing is I received one of those texts, and of course we knew about this was going on, where these text messages are going out, and my K-tag is set up on automatic payment. So I
you
mean,
knew.
I knew right away. I was like, when I got it, I was like, well, there's no reason why I should be receiving this because I have automatic payment set up on my K-tag.
We do have a phone caller with us right now. On the line is Titus. Titus is from Sylvan Grove. Titus, your question or comment of our legislators this evening.
Yeah.
Phone caller right now. Line is Titus. Titus is from Sylvan Grove. Titus, your question or comment of our legislators this evening.
Yes, I would like to ask Elaine Bowers, who is going to run for governor after Governor Kelly retires.
Well, Titus, maybe you all can chime in on that. We're hearing rumors in
There's a lot of
Topeka.
rumors.
Yeah, we do know our Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, has publicly said this, so we can count him in. We have heard on the Senate side, our Senate President, Ty Masterson, is interested. Who else can we
Well,
mention?
Dayton Moore is considered it, the former general manager of the Royals.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would be quite different.
I mean,
Former
at this-
Governor Collier, I'm sure, is
Yeah.
testing the waters right now.
And I had heard that he was actually going to announce weeks ago, but he hasn't yet.
Haven't heard much.
I mean, I would say at this point, it's very subjective
Yes,
on
sir.
who's going to be running on both sides of the ticket.
Oh, yes,
I
that's
mean,
right.
you can talk about on the
Lieutenant
Democratic
Governor
side and also
David Ford.
Republican side. In fact, was it one of the news outlets actually had a story on all of those that are being considered being possible gubernatorial candidates.
We do
Who
know
knows?
there's a lady, a school board member, I believe, in Wichita that just announced last week. So that, lots of rumors, even in our Capitol building.
It's wide open.
Wide open.
yes.
Any interest among our participants this evening?
No, we have great
No,
jobs right now.
not at this moment.
Yeah, we are actually very happy with what we do.
Okay, well, you'll let us know if you...
Yes,
if
of
you-
course.
okay,
You'd
all
be the
right.
first to know, Becky.
One of the things I wanted to talk about that has been in the realm of public interest is the balloting that goes on in Kansas and how that is done. And there's been discussion about mail-in ballots particularly, which, you know, in some cases are very, done very successfully and very helpful to many, many people. But there's concern about they come in 3 days late, or 3 days after the election, which is legal at this point. But you know, should we allow those to count? Discussion about that. Where do we stand at this point?
Becky, we've had that bill in the Fed and State, and it's crossed the Senate floor favorably and over to the House to eliminate the 3-day grace period. Personally, as a county commissioner, I canvassed the vote for 7 years, and I never wanted to disenfranchise the voter. And we took every effort to count every vote. But in the subsequent few years, people view that still as some form of election fraud, that somehow someone could sneak a ballot in after the results are known on a Tuesday. Plus, it's been well publicized that the post office has been just dreadful about getting ballots in on time. Ballots come in without postmarks. So we voted in the Senate to eliminate the 3-day grace period to ensure that 7 p.m. on Election Day is the deadline. And I think, one, it will give voters confidence, and also people will not be relying on the post office and lose their ability to vote.
I understand our president's going to take over the post office. Did I hear that today or yesterday? So
Yeah, we
not
heard
my
that.
change. We'll see.
Mailing our ballots, think about how many people touch those. And then even going out of state and how unreliable our mail has become, even for medicine or just our general
Yes.
mail. So I like our drop boxes at our courthouses. Those seem secure to me. I would much rather drop one there than in our U.S. mail. And Bill is exactly right. We were hearing comments now where sometimes there's not even a postmark on that ballot when it comes in. So how do you know when that was mailed? And times are different from 2017 when that bill was passed to now with our elections and advanced voting, which is so popular.
Yes, that's become very popular. I do hear one objection, and people seem to feel like it's not fair exactly to our people who serve in the military and are overseas, that it's difficult for them to vote. But I guess
They get 45 days, and also they can vote by electronic means. There are federal state agreements on that. I forget what the acronym is for it, but there's a very specific process to enable veterans, or not veterans, but active duty military to get their vote.
My understanding from one of those military people is that serves on the floor that they don't get 3-day grace period. It has to be in by the
Yes.
day. So
They have to get it in by 7 o'clock on election day,
yeah.
but they start early.
well, I have to admit, I always thought that was a little odd. It's like, okay, you can vote, make sure you vote, and I'm one that always likes to do it on election day, just because I like that
Traditional.
feeling, But there are other people that it's not convenient, they're out of town, whatever. But to have it come in 3 days later, I always thought that was a little odd.
I've lived in countries where it was a national holiday and everyone had a purple thumb that showed they voted.
Yes.
So, it ought to be a holiday in my mind. It's very important. Very important.
And I used to run an election board, and they didn't even have where you could pre-vote unless you lived like you were gone and had a forwarding address. I mean, so if you were sick on that day, you just didn't get to vote. Where now we've opened it up where anybody can vote early, but it used to be like if you proved you had a job where you traveled and you were gone. And so we've changed that from then,
Better.
many years ago.
I want to talk about, Senator Clifford, I'm going to address this to you, just some information I saw today in a news story that came out for media in Kansas talking about the Ogallala Aquifer and the Kansas Geological Survey and some of the work that they do there. And of course, they're always studying it, but this came out today saying that the most recent study they did, that the region lost almost a foot of groundwater in 2024, which I think was a little bit unexpected because we did have a good year of rains previously, but this spring has not been really great, hadn't been really great, and it continues to decline. And you're of course in western Kansas
Sure.
and part of that, so
I
what are your
represent
feelings?
a good portion of it. Of course, Chairman Waymaster's a producer, and he could give you the details. In places they lost a foot, but not in all places. There is a ticking clock right now based on legislation we did in the last biennium. The chief engineer will have some additional powers to mandate reduced water usage. That would start in July of 2026, so there's another 15, 16 months yet. The regions through their GMDs are being asked to reach what's called Q stable, which is basically a sustainable level of their particular region's water. I've always felt, and Troy could back me up, our producers know what to do. I mean, this is their livelihood, this is their legacy to their children and their grandchildren, and I don't think Topeka imposed solutions are right. I think the chief engineer has spread the word that, I have this power and let's make sure we get there. But I think listening to our producers has always been the best thing to do. They get it, and I think they'll make it. Any thoughts, Troy?
Well, and I would say, as working for my father and my uncle in our farming operation, our family farm, I mean, we went back to the 1990s. We started with no-till farming, which conserves the water in the ground. And by not having that tillage, you're not drying it out. And I would say in the early 2000s, we went from, partial to complete no-till farming, where we planted sorghum and wheat with no-till. No, we don't irrigate. We're dryland farmers, and but there's irrigation across a wide swath of central and western Kansas. But water is an issue that, and this was questioned when we had a bill this week, when we were talking about creating a task force and then identifying what the water needs are across the state. And one of the things that was expressed is, well, if you throw money out there, how much water do you generate? I mean, it's by the grace of God that we get water. It's not, you can't generate any more water with money. And it's a very good question that was posed, because we're trying to address a need and a concern that has been going on not just for a few years, but for decades. Because when I was, first in the legislature, I was on the Ag and Natural Resources Budget Committee, and we were having a discussion on how can we get more water into the Ogallala Aquifer. And one thing that was brought up in 1982 was building an aqueduct that would carry water from the Missouri River, which the state of Kansas has water rights, to the Ogallala. At that point, it was going to be a cost of like $1.4 billion to construct this aqueduct. In 2015, it was around $32 billion to construct it. So the sheer cost of trying to transfer water from one part of the state to the other is it's so considerable there's no way we could possibly do it. But is creating a task force that's going to go around the state and talk about how we can have a 10-year water plan, is that going to be beneficial to the water needs that we have in many different communities throughout the state? I mean, we talk about, Representative Wassinger brought up many times this week about what Hayes implemented decades ago as far as water conservation. And she expressed, she was like, until people are serious about what they're going to do as far as water, I don't want to throw any more money at it, because Hayes did it. And Hayes also purchased the R9 Ranch with the city of Russell. They're looking at trying to transfer those water rights so there can be water in those communities. So it goes beyond, I think you're right, Senator Clifford. I mean, the producers, we know how to manage our water. It's how do you instruct everybody else to do that? And I will say, as far as being a pinnacle, I think the city of Hayes is. Because I remember going over there years ago, and you didn't get a glass of water when you sat down in a restaurant. You had to ask for it.
Yes, yes.
They don't water.
And they
don't
implemented a
water the
lot of
sidewalk.
different water conservation policies in the city of Hayes. And I think if we want to talk about this 10-year water plan, which is going to be mimicked off of the Ike transportation plan that we had, which is the same format, led by the same individual who I'm meeting with next week. But we had all these task force meetings across the state of Kansas to talk about transportation needs. Now it's just going to be shifting over to water needs. And how do we address that and have a 10-year water plan?
That'll be very interesting. We do have a phone call we want to get to right now from Hayes. We have Bob on the line. Bob, you have a question or comment for our panelists this evening.
Yes, thank you. I heard you guys talking about capers. My wife's been a teacher for well over 30 years, and she's looking at retirement, and we're seeing what she gets from capers, which capers, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. And we're looking at what she's going to get per month when she retires. And then I worked at a company for about 7 years, and they had a 401k. And I put in it for 7 years, never put another penny in there. And I have over 10 times more in my 401k than she will get at Capers. And it's still growing. And with that 401k, I can leave it to her, to my kids, or whatever. I can leave beneficiaries. Why doesn't Kansas, number one, why do they have Capers? Why don't they have a 401k? Thank you.
Yeah, I
You can take that one, Senator
I wish
Clifford.
I'd invested with Bob, because that's quite a staggering return on investment. I would say that, if his wife lives for 50 more years, she'll still get that payment. And there isn't a 401k in the world that will do that for you. So it's an excellent, secure, defined benefit plan. It wasn't meant to be the whole solution. It sounds like Bob and his wife are in good shape between both of their Social Securities, his 401k, and her Capers plan. So it may look modest on the front end, but depending on survival, it can be a very, very generous plan that's guaranteed.
And that's why in 2015 we had the hybrid of Capers 3, was to emulate the standard Capers plan and then also have some component of a 401k. Now there's been a lot of employees who have been upset that have come on after 2017 when that was implemented, because it doesn't have the same benefits that Capers 1 and 2 does. But that's also because of what you participated. I mean, if you invest more into Capers 3, your rate of return should be more as well. But when we had the State Employee Pay and Compensation Committee a couple years ago, we were analyzing CAPERS 1, CAPERS 2, and CAPERS 3, and what the benefits were when you retired. And if you just did the bare minimum, yeah, CAPERS 3 is going to be less. But if you contribute more like you would, or maybe Bob is doing in his 401k, then your rate of return when you retire is going to be more. Now, the bill that we just had was modifying CAPERS 3. It is going to be impacting the unfunded actuarial liability, which is something that I didn't particularly like because we tried to make such great strides in the last few years in regards to that. But we also wanted something that was more palpable for the employees who felt like they were getting something that was somewhat beneficial, like CAPERS 1 and CAPERS 2. But I agree with Senator Clifford. I mean, it sounds like Bob did some very good investments with his 401k.
Yeah, absolutely.
But CAPERS was initially set up as a pension system. You do not have Fortune 500 companies in the United States with pensions anymore. And there's a reason why. They're costly. They cost a lot of money. When I worked for Chrysler Corporation, when I started in 2000, I had the benefit of receiving a pension and a 401k both. But they were weeding the pension out because pensions are very expensive. And I know pretty much all corporations have gone to a 401k method. It's your forms of government that have stayed with the pension.
401ks have been great the last few years because the market's been pretty good.
Oh, very good,
Strong
very good.
overall.
Right.
Your rate of return in the
You go
401k has
back-
been great.
Or future, we don't know.
2008, 2009?
Yep.
I mean, everybody was getting out of the market and getting out of 401ks because they were losing so much money,
Yeah.
which is not the appropriate, method.
Yeah.
You're supposed to stay in and ride it, but
Again,
you
with the-
ride the markets.
With the defined benefit plan, though, if the market goes down, that benefit is still guaranteed.
It's guaranteed.
For employees.
Yes.
Another thing we worked on was working after retirement. So a CAPERS retiree formerly was somewhat penalized by going back to work for a CAPERS employer. That was ridiculous, especially where we needed teachers and other folks to join our workforce. The threshold had been at 25,000 where these penalties would start to kick in. We moved it up 2 years ago to 40,000, assuming that folks like Bob's wife, who's going to be a retired teacher, might come back part-time and teach. That 40,000 threshold would keep her out of the penalty and encourage her to come back and work.
We do have Titus back on the phone with us from Sylvan Grove, and I'm going to guess he's probably has another question or comment about CAPERS. Titus?
Well, the gubernatorial race.
Titus, do you have a question of our panelists again?
Lose him.
I think Titus asked about the governor's race, didn't he?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
We're curious too on that.
Yeah.
We're curious about all races. So,
Did we lose Titus, or do we still have him on there? Okay. Looks like we've dropped the call on that. I'm sorry, I was getting my callers confused this evening. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and Don, I'll address this to you, well, everybody, please feel free to comment, but talking about the budget and things that did not get funded to the level that they were asked about. What's been in the news most recently, again, is our special ed funding that is been kind of a hot topic and is often. And as I understand it, the government had set an estimate of what they would fund and actually cut that back quite a bit. Is that correct, Don?
In committee, we
committee.
looked at 30 million, but let me just back up and say that 60% of the Kansas budget is for education. So that is a huge chunk that we do put in towards education. So in no way do we not want to have education be strong, and we're working at looking things that can boost, because we've seen some of the reading scores and stuff dip significantly over the last several years. And so we want that to be strong. How do we do that? How do we bring it back to the classroom? I think after it left committee, it got taken down to just leaving it the same as last year and not increasing it any. And then it ended up going up 10 million. So there is a 10 million increase. And that happens outside of the committee. So that's
Plus,
what I know right now.
The 75 that was there last year.
It's still
also
there.
It's still
will be
there. It's still
Yes.
there.
We
Yes.
have made
We
some
made an
effort.
additional
We never
10 million.
cut it back, we just added, yes.
Yeah, we had a 10 million.
So-
And the one thing that, and Don is correct, I mean, the majority of the Kansas state budget goes to K through 12 education. And when we addressed the Gannon lawsuit, and actually when it was settled, there were certain parameters that had to be met. And so there's a yearly increase that goes into K through 12 education. Then there's also an increase in regards to the consumer price index. Well, with the prices that we've been experiencing with inflation, the amount of dollars that have flowed into K through 12 education just in the last 2 years is nearly $500 million more. And that's something that we do not control in the budget, because that is part of the settlement that we had with Gannon. And so I know there are some that are upset with the $10 million enhancement that we did, but at the same time, you've got to look at the other side, because I will hear a lot of school districts saying, well, we're supplementing special education with our general fund. Well, we're seeing an increase of, well, we're looking at in 2026, about $100 million, 2027, $110 million, 2028, 115, another 115 in 2029. That is the increase that just automatically happens every single year because of the Gannon settlement. That doesn't factor in the amount that is factored from the CPI. And like I said, for the last 2 fiscal years, that's been almost $500 million that has been going into K through 12 education.
And am I correct
And-
that just the per pupil went up $200 and some too?
Yes.
So they'll have that also.
And so then earlier when we were talking about, you know, the state and local forms of government and unfunded mandates, we have an unfunded mandate with special education with the federal government. They said that they were going to fund up to 40%, and they're not even close to that.
14, something like
Yeah,
that.
it's very minimal, I mean, compared to what and then they will say, well, we just said up to 40%. We didn't say we do 40%. But,
Distinction there.
yeah, there is you got to watch the wording. But at the same time, when we're looking at what we can do within the budget and still addressing the needs, and I'll say it, I mean, I'm a product of public education, both, you know, in primary and secondary and higher ed in the state of Kansas. But there is a lot of dollars that is flowing into K through 12 education, and that percentage that Don mentioned before is only going to go up in the years. And so when people always want to talk about, well, we need to cut spending, we need to cut this, we need to, you know, readdress it. There's only a small portion of the budget that we can actually look at, because our hands are tied in regards to K through 12 education funding because of the settlement with the Gannon lawsuit.
We are starting to close in on the last segment of our show this evening and have a couple minutes left, but we do have April on the phone from Natoma. You have a question or comment of our panelists this evening? April, you have a comment or question of our panelists tonight? No, not there. Okay, not after all. Before the time gets away from us, I wanted to give you, Senator Bowers, an opportunity to talk about, you always bring something fun to us, and there's a new mural that's in the State House that is related, there has
so
some
exciting.
connection to Western Kansas.
It
Tell us about
is, and so this is a capital preservation project, and I serve on the Capital Preservation Committee, so it's been thrilling to watch for this. 2022, we passed Senate Bill 479, and that authorized the women's suffrage movement mural, and the League of Women Voters fundraised enough money, and we do have an artist from Western Kansas. Her name is Phyllis Gabre Kuhn, and she grew up in Kingman. She was a farmer's daughter and now lives in Manhattan. And she painted a mural, and it is beautiful and colorful, and it's called Rebel Women. And it features 13 women from Kansas who did different important things. And we have someone from Waukene, Larned, and Salina who are featured on this mural. And it is stunning. It's at the base on the first floor in front of the Cage elevator, which always was a blank, empty boring wall, and now we have this big, vibrant. And it was dedicated on Kansas Day, which is exciting. And so, and by the way, we were the 8th state to extend equal voting rights to women. So we weren't the first, but we were in the top 10, and that's
bad
very
at all.
important.
How do things like that get funded?
Private donations on that. In fact, we do have a mural that we are looking for funding for. It's the 1st Black Regiment Soldier mural that has been, a law was passed last year, or maybe 2 years ago, to go ahead with this project, but now it does need a benefactor or funding to get started on that. And they're well over $100,000. So it's not just a small drop in the bucket, it's a big commitment. And then the process is the Capital Preservation Committee meets, approves the artist and the artwork. So it's very, very particular on what does go in our Capitol.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate our panelists. We again have been visiting with Senator Elaine Bowers, with Representative Troy Waymaster, also with Senator William Clifford, and new to us, and we're so delighted to have you be able to visit us, Representative Don Wolf, and we appreciate all of you and appreciate your time in Topeka on behalf of all of us. Thank you for joining us this evening on the Kansas Legislature. I'm Becky Kaiser.